Can ancient fungi tell us anything about climate change?
Does where you live impact on your health? What are some of the key factors to aging well?
We'll be exploring all this and more on this season of 10 Things to Know About.
This week, we're investigating the complex world of the immune system.
While most of our body's systems give us the ability to do things like move or eat or breathe, for example, the immune system is designed to prevent infections from getting in and kill them if they do.
Desi Malinova is an immunologist at Queen's University Belfast.
The immune system is a system throughout our body which involves many, many different cell types that protects us from different injuries, from different infections that we may encounter.
You talk about cell types. I've heard of T cell. Can you take me through the sort of makeup of our immune system?
Yep. The early cells that will respond to any infection will be what we call the innate immune system. They're not specific. They don't necessarily know or sometimes care whether they're responding to a bacterium, a virus, to a fungal infection. And they will respond in a sort of general manner. They will try to kill things, they will try to eat things. There are other immune cells, the adaptive immune cells, and these are the more specific ones. So these are the B cells and the T cells that you mentioned, and B cells we've heard a lot about through COVID because they are the antibody producers for a more specific infection.
When harmful bacteria, viruses, or toxins enter the body, the immune system kicks in. The B cells produce antibodies to mark the invading cells. Then it's the role of the other immune cells to come in and destroy them.
What happens then with an autoimmune disease? It sounds like the body is sort of fighting itself.
Yeah. Some people describe it as the body is not able to differentiate between an infection or your own cells. I think it's a little bit more subtle than that. There's a little bit more regulation there. They tend to be either organ-specific or specific to a particular molecule. So it's not quite, an all-out attack across your body. But it's certainly your immune system not able to regulate correctly against certain parts of your own body. One of the most common autoimmune diseases is type 1 diabetes. And there we've got T cells infiltrating into the pancreas and killing off cells that should be making insulin. And we get similar infiltrates in multiple sclerosis, for example, and a few other diseases.
For decades, researchers have focused on the overactive role of the T cell in autoimmune diseases. However, new studies suggest that the B cells may play an equally important role in targeting healthy cells for destruction. Desi is working on a cross-border project to advance this research.
We're looking specifically at how the environment in our bodies in autoimmunity can affect how B cells are activated. And this really has given us the opportunity to harness techniques and skills and tools available across Ireland in very different fields. So we're working with pharmacists, we're working with stem cell biologists and so on, to harness those from many different fields and to use those in immunology for really quite cool questions. And questions that affect the Irish populations, but questions that also have a very global impact.
There are over 80 known autoimmune diseases that roughly affect 1 in 10 people across the globe. One of the most common of these disorders in Ireland is MS, or multiple sclerosis.
Stephen Comiskey is one of approximately 9,000 people in Ireland living with MS.
I was first diagnosed with MS about 7 years ago, and I was picked up in the Eye Hospital where I was working at the time because I developed visual symptoms and blurred vision in my left eye.
What was it like then to get confirmation that it was MS?
Terrifying.
Yeah.
Even though I knew that's what it was, even up until that point when all the pieces of the jigsaw were starting to be pieced together, I knew it was it, and it's only when you get that final diagnosis that it really hits home.
What is MS?
MS is a neurological disorder which affects your spinal cord, it affects your nervous system, and it can affect different parts of your body, including your eyes. It can cause different symptoms, including numbness, and it can cause blurriness of vision and fatigue. So at the time when I was being tested for MS, I started to lose feeling in my legs, very cold, pins and needles up to about my waist. I had issues with going to the toilet, and those are some of the symptoms that you can have with MS. Lucky enough with the type of MS I have, mine got better after a couple of months. It takes a good while for it to go back to normal.
In terms of medication and managing at the moment, what is that like?
So at the moment I'm on an immunosuppressant, and with that immunosuppressant I get bloods taken every 3 months just to monitor my white blood cell count to make sure that my immune system is okay. If my cell count was to drop, then they would take me off the medication and try me on a different type of medication. But there's loads of medications that are specifically to deal with somebody's version of MS or type of MS that wouldn't benefit me. Even if they have the same type of MS as me, they might need a different medication. When I was diagnosed, I'll be perfectly honest with you, I didn't deal with it at the time. I ended up having to go and do a lot of therapy and speak with people. I ended up going to a lot of conferences about MS, and just through that whole process I was able to have a better understanding and really fit MS into my life and not MS become my whole life. But it's made me be more proactive about my health. I recently moved to the coast and I joined up with a local rowing club. Through all these activities, I've actually met people with MS in the community, and I'm able to have those conversations with them now and basically to reassure one another, you know, it's not the end of the world, and there's always somebody there to help.
Multiple sclerosis is a disease that attacks the central nervous system. This system controls how the body moves by sending signals through nerves in the brain and spinal cord. These nerves are wrapped in a protective membrane called myelin, which helps transmit the signal. In MS, the immune system attacks this myelin, causing a wide range of symptoms. Crucially, it also interferes with the body's natural ability to create new protective membranes. Jessica White is part of a team seeking to reprogram immune cells into helping the body repair myelin.
We're a neuroimmunology lab that looks at how we can boost repair using the immune system. And specifically, we're looking at T cells, and more specifically, regulatory T cells, which are a pro-regenerative subset of T cells. And these have already been shown to boost repair in the central nervous system and could be potentially a therapeutic target for MS patients.
The type of T cells that control how the immune system responds to infection are called Treg cells. They can help prevent attacks on healthy cells and also help to repair damaged cells such as myelin. The goal of the researchers is to enable more T cells to become Treg cells that could help in the fight against MS.
It's very difficult to actually study MS using human tissue, especially the pro-regenerative properties of this. So we isolate spleens from mice, and we can isolate these T cells from these spleens using a specialized kit that essentially labels our cells with an antibody and then also some beads that will magnetically sort out using a magnet.
So you do that one by one?
Essentially, yes.
The ability to isolate T cells is a critical first step. The next stage is to create environments that could help encourage T cells to become a stable population of Treg cells that could then help the body repair myelin. The team at Queen's are working closely on this with their partners in Galway, and I'm meeting Owen McAvoy to find out more.
Owen, biomedical engineering is like this rapidly evolving field, but it's also relatively new. Can you tell me a little bit about it, please?
Yeah, so biomedical engineering is a really exciting field that applies our understanding of engineering to solve problems in medicine. So, for example, how can we generate active forces and how do our muscles work? How does our heart beat? These are all concepts in biomechanics, part of biomedical engineering.
How does that relate to your role in this particular project looking at MS and Treg cells?
We're hoping that we can improve the yield of T cells through mechanical considerations and also to increase their stability so they stay as Tregs for longer and therefore can carry out this role we want in an immunotherapy.
T cells adapt and change depending on the environment they're in. Using simulations, Owen wants to explore the behavior of T cells by designing special environments for them in the lab.
Best way to think about them really is like a spread of jelly, okay? That they're kind of soft, they can absorb water, and you can control the shapes they take based on what environment you put them into. So you can functionalize these hydrogels with different proteins, with different cytokines, different antibodies, and the immune cells will interact with all of these things. You can even pattern them in particular ways if you want the cell to spread out along a line, or in a circle, in a rectangle, even in a star, these complex shapes. And that has a really significant impact on the outcomes for the cell and how it's going to behave, and is it going to become a regulatory T cell.
It sort of sounds like you're building an obstacle course for these Tregs.
Absolutely. In the long term, what we'd like to see is a more effective and a more promising immunotherapy, whereby you can deliver a patient's own cells following some treatment in the lab, some chemical and mechanical intervention, that they can then start to reduce these symptoms of MS, that they can start to remyelinate and improve the overall outcomes for a patient.
It's actually been really nice to have the collaborators over in Galway, because they do a lot of techniques like with computational biology that we can't do here at Queen's. So actually being able to bring two sides of biology together has actually really pushed this project far further than we would be able to do alone. And I think that's really nice when it comes to collaborations, that we can utilize two areas of science and drive something even bigger.
London, 1348, the year the bubonic plague arrived. The bite of fleas infected with the deadly bacteria Yersinia pestis. The death rate climbing, the cemeteries overwhelmed and overflowing. Killing 30 to 50% of the entire population of Europe. It's one of the most significant and bleakest moments in our history. Researchers had long suspected that an event of such enormity would have shaped human evolution. And in a graveyard in one of London's grim plague pits, scientists found evidence of how nearly 700 years later, our immune system is still being affected by the deadliest pandemic on record. By painstakingly extracting DNA from skeletons buried before, during, and after the plague, the team found mutations in a gene called ERAP2. If you had the right mutations in ERAP2, you were 40% more likely to survive, as the inflammatory response to fight the plague pathogen was much stronger. This conferred an advantage on those with the mutation, which was then passed on to the next generation, and so on. But this protection came with a price. Too much inflammation can become problematic, as the same mutations in ERAP2 are known risk factors for autoimmune diseases in modern times, like rheumatoid arthritis and Crohn's disease. And with the COVID pandemic still in our midst, this chronicle is a reminder that the long reach of the Black Death still echoes through our genes. See you next time.
Autoimmune diseases affect hundreds of thousands of people in Ireland. And living with a chronic illness such as inflammatory bowel disease, or IBD, can have lifelong consequences. Victoria Spillane has had Crohn's disease for over 20 years. Victoria, how did you discover that you had Crohn's disease?
I discovered it in a very unconventional way. It was actually pain in my left knee and lower back pain. And it started when I was 13. I was very active, playing basketball, so up and down to the GP saying, oh, I have this issue. He kept saying it's a basketball injury. Then there was the onset of your regular Crohn's disease issues, such as diarrhea. I was going to 20 plus times a day to the toilet. Severe abdomen pain. Day and night, it just wasn't letting up. Fatigue was just off the chain. No matter how much sleep that I would get, it just didn't help. They brought me then down to the paediatric ward, and that's then when the whole journey of being diagnosed started.
In terms of the treatments or the medicines that were available to you, did they work?
I would have been on infusions and then just the injections. And I was very hopeful reading up on these when I was being put on them. Yes, okay, this is to be a miracle drug. And unfortunately, it wasn't in my case. So the only solution for me was to have surgery, to have the large intestine removed eventually.
Because I think lots of people might, have heard, if they don't have experience of Crohn's disease, they might have, they think it's a disease of your bowel, that maybe it causes discomfort, but they don't necessarily appreciate how it affects your whole body and your life, and actually that removing your gut is the answer.
Exactly. It is a chronic illness. It's not deemed life-threatening, but it can be for some, and it almost was for me.
And what was the impact then? How did you react to the surgery?
Very well. I had fantastic health for 10 years, and then year 10, that's when some issues started to happen. The Crohn's is asleep, but it's snoring, is the way that I put it. And it's snoring in the sense of I can still have joint pain, I can still have eye issues, and it's still in the back of my head though as well. Okay, even if it could be a tummy bug, or I might just, feel off. Is the Crohn starting back again? I might get a mouth ulcer. Is that the start of it again?
While Victoria's situation is rare, the number of people affected by autoimmune diseases has risen in the last 40 years. So there's a real drive to further understand IBD and develop treatments. I'm in Cork to meet immunologist Ken Nally.
Inflammatory bowel disease is a generic term which refers to different types of disease which affect the gut. And essentially what they all share in common is where the immune system becomes inappropriately active and it attacks your gut tissue. So the gastrointestinal tract is basically a tube running from the mouth to the anus, and that tube is formed by a single layer of epithelial cells. So these epithelial cells are very tightly connected to each other, almost by wires, and that forms a barrier, right? So it forms a tube all the way, and that barrier is really important, not just for digestion and absorption of nutrients in the small intestine, but also to separate the contents of the tube, it's called the lumen of the gut, to separate all those contents which are food, digested food and bacteria and viruses away from the rest of the body. So you keep the rest of the body.
It's kind of mad that it's one single layer of cells to protect your gut from the outside world in a way, isn't it?
It is, yeah. When you realize that, it's a little bit sobering because
everything you put in there.
Everything you put in there. So for health and well-being, it's really important that that gut barrier is maintained and it's intact.
And when somebody is experiencing a flare-up or they're experiencing inflammation, those epithelial cells are being attacked and damaged.
Yes, when these immune cells become very active, like the T cells become very active, they essentially think that they're protecting the host, protecting the body from an infection or something like that. As part of that response, of that inflammatory response, there ends up being collateral damage to the tissue. The immune cells can induce cell death in those epithelial cells, disrupting the integrity of that barrier.
Making them die before they need to, before the gut is kind of went, here's the backup cell for this one. Currently, there are drugs available that dampen inflammation in the gut and block the immune signals that damage the protective gut barrier. But unfortunately, they don't work for everyone.
The current challenge for IBD research is to understand why, of 100 patients, only 35 to 40 will respond to a current therapy. Why don't the other patients respond? So what we're interested in is trying to identify additional signals that the immune system is producing that can induce epithelial cell death and affect your barrier function.
The team at UCC is working on new ways to investigate why protective cells in the gut die in response to inflammatory signals during IBD. They collect gut biopsies from patients with IBD, and then in the lab they can use cells from these biopsies to grow a replica of the human gut, known as a mini-gut. Peter Flood is going to show me how it works.
So what we have here is a high magnification image of a mini-gut. How I describe a mini-gut is that it has a single layer of epithelial cells. So basically, when you grow these organoids like this, they try to replicate that type of tissue architecture in vitro. Themselves, yeah, once you give them the correct environmental cues.
Amazing.
And they're facing inwards into the central portion of the organoid, which is basically empty. So this is what we call the lumen. So you can kind of think of this as modeling the center of your gut, where your food passes through. And it's kind of amazing.
It is kind of amazing though, isn't it? And the
Yeah.
fact that it forms the structure with the lumen in the middle, I mean, it's kind of mad.
Yeah, so the really great thing about the organoid technology is that not only do they kind of resemble physically how the host organ looks like, in this case the intestines, but they also have a lot of the same functional characteristics, so they behave the same way as the actual tissue itself. And this isn't just come down to a tissue level, it's also down to a patient level. So if I isolate these from a patient with certain characteristics from a biopsy, they'll be maintained in culture.
Does that then allow you to study disease in a much more precise way?
Yes, exactly. And this is a technology that's applicable to different tissues as well. So we have organoids from kidneys, from lung, basically from everything you can think of, they've been able to manage to generate organoids using those same principles of trying to replicate those conditions that the stem cells experience in our bodies, and then kind of using that to grow them in vitro.
In IBD, the immune system produces signalling molecules that can kill healthy cells. By applying a fluorescent dye that glows to indicate when cells die, the researchers can use the mini-gut to identify and understand the signals that induce cell death.
These intense regions of bright green, so this is basically the dye is active and it's fluorescing. So what this means is that this cell has died. So we're able to measure that signal and quantify it, so we can basically have like a number of cell death, let's say, for each organoid.
There are approximately 3,000 molecules in the body that could trigger the immune system to kill protective gut cells in IBD. To date, the researchers have tested over 600 of these in the mini-gut and identified 10 that can kill cells. The hope is that this system could provide a more reliable way to better understand these molecules and ultimately to develop interventions and therapies for patients with IBD. Do you think this is a hopeful time for people with IBD?
It is, because I think just from a research viewpoint, that so much is being done to have new medicines come out and find out what can keep people in remission for longer. I'm just very happy people are being more vocal about it, because there's nothing to be ashamed of. You know, and I get there's symptoms there that they're not really nice to speak about, but everyone goes to the toilet. Everyone, you know, has other issues that are there as well, that everyone is going to experience something at some stage.
That's our 10 things to know about the immune system. And that's all from us this season. We hope you join us again next year for more fascinating insights into the world around us.